Oh, I feel quite nervous having this august meeting of people from all around the country. It's it's fairly awe-inspiring. So thank you for being here and thank you for asking me. I really appreciate it. Um, I I'll give you a bit of background on me to start with. Perhaps that's a good way to start.
Absolutely.
I'm from England originally, and I did a degree in zoology at Leeds University way back in 1970. And I did a bit of bacteriology and biochemistry and at the time. So I had a bit of a science background, and I worked as a teacher in a secondary school for a few years until I arrived in New Zealand in 1988, and was very fortunate to arrive at the time when Department of Conservation was just getting going. And they had all sorts of guys from Land and Survey and Forest Service and Wildlife Service, and none of them knew what they were doing, and they all sort of lumped together in one office trying to make sense of things. And I got the job as the Conservation Board Executive Officer for the Wanganui Taranaki Conservation Board. And that was my baptism of fire into New Zealand conservation. And really nobody knew what the Department of Conservation had. They had all these bits of land and trying to make sense of the conservation estate. Somebody's got their microphone on there. Yeah, so I was instrumental in putting together the first conservation management strategy for Wanganui Taranaki, and part of my job was informing the conservation board members and getting them up to speed on what the department was about. So I learned an awful lot very quickly, and discovered, of course, that New Zealand wasn't quite the clean green country I'd been led to believe, because it was full of exotic animals and exotic plants. And in fact, it's got more exotic plants than it's got native ones. So so I worked with that for 5 years, and then I was moved to Waiheke Island because we loved it, and I thought I'd get a job with the council or something, but it wasn't until I actually arrived with 2 houses and 2 mortgages that I finally got the job here as the park ranger at Whakanefa Regional Park, because I knew 2 people on the interview board, which was sort of the way New Zealand works. So I got that job, and they dumped me at Whakanefa Regional Park, which was basically an old retired farm, and gave me a 2-wheel drive ute and no tools, and said, "Here you are, get on with it." And I was very pleased to get the job, and very soon realized that the place was absolutely infested with every weed under the sun, particularly around the foreshore and main public areas. There were some nice pieces of bush, some patches of original forest, and an awful lot of regrowing Kānuka forest. And down the foreshore, it was just totally infested with gorse and tobacco weed and moth plant and honeysuckle and the litany of New Zealand weeds. So very quickly, I had to get into doing weed control in a big way. Waiheke, though, is very spray averse. And so I sort of got the idea that it wasn't a very good idea as the new park ranger, the new boy on the block, with everybody looking at me from the local community, to start spraying things. So I invited the locals in and said, "Well, show me how you're going to do this if you don't use wholesale herbicides." And I presented them with the big hill down at Pukaraka Flats, which was this bank which was basically full of every weed you can imagine, and moth plant climbing over the top of it, and honeysuckle and gorse and so on, and said, "Okay, show me how to do this without using herbicides." And a few brave souls turned up for a few days and tried to do it, until they threw up their hands in horror and said, "This is too much. It's just obviously we can't do this with manual methods." So then you know, got to work with hatchets and spray packs, and soon realized that if I started spraying things, you got huge patches of burnt brown ground, and you had to come back again and redo it, and you had to go back again and redo it. And open ground is the most wonderful place for weeds. So every time there was spraying done, there was open ground and more weeds came back again. I had volunteers working for me spraying, and they got it on themselves, and they ended up spray drift and killing tree ferns, and it was just not nice. I started on using Vigilant gel in the park, and you know, that was reasonably successful until I sort of killed a couple of kauri trees nearby when I was doing some work on some gorse. And I wanted to find some way of doing this that didn't have those bi-kills, and worked for some time on producing a glyphosate gel, and started out with 120 grams per liter formulation of a gel, and worked on the willows in the wetland there. That was my first foray into working at the park, and it was successful. So I did this for a while and decided, well, I've got a product here. And this was after about 10 years of working at the park when I started to decide what I could make a product out of this. And at the end of 10 years, I'd actually run out of enthusiasm with the gathering Auckland Council bureaucracy. I was no longer free to get on. I'm a bit of a I don't like rules very much. So I was told more and more what to do and how to do it and when to do it, and it just didn't make sense to me anymore. So I was working my way out of being at the park and producing the gel, and started selling it at the local market, and soon realized that it actually had some it had some success and people were interested in it, and I knew that the council would be interested in a glyphosate gel. So I went through all the EPA stuff, got my approvals for the approval rating from the EPA, did all my labeling, started to work on the bottles and the tops and the labels and the whole hoorah business of producing a product that I could sell. And that was 13, 14 years ago now. And slowly over time, I added the other products, added the Bamboo Buster, which was the double strength gel, because it was obvious with some things that 120 grams per liter wasn't quite enough to have the result I wanted. Moved on then to a picloram gel, because there were still people who said, oh, look, we need a picloram gel. We've got to have a picloram gel. So I produced the picloram gel, and went on then to the met sulfuran product for people who wanted gingers and bulb plants, which respond much better to met sulfuran. And finally, the Glymax product. The Glymax product was mostly an effort on my behalf to find out what the strongest possible glyphosate gel you could produce was. And 400 grams per liter is basically the strongest glyphosate that will actually produce a gel. And it's the ideal product for working with vines like old man's beard and big jasmines and so on. That's sort of where I got to. I tried an organic gel. I tried to produce an organic gel using acetic acid, And when I produced it, the gel that sort of worked was 30% acetic acid. But when I took it to the EPA, they refused to approve it for the public because they said it was too toxic, which was kind of interesting. They were frightened of people getting in their eyes and children burning their irises and so on with using this gel. So they would only approve it for professional use, and professional users were not the slightest bit interested in using something that wasn't as effective. So that one disappeared quite quickly.
We just got a question in the chat. Would I can't say that one. Would trip work as a gel?
Would
someone else
triclopyr?
Triclopyr. It probably would. Why would I use triclopyr if picloram will do the job and glyphosate will do the job? I've thought about it, and I've asked a few of the professional users whether they think there's an advantage in the triclopyr, and the general opinion was there wasn't an advantage to using it over what we've already got. And I don't want to produce a whole lot of products that aren't going to be of any extra benefit. I've had a few people that have added metsulfuron, the met gel, along with the picloram when they're doing the stump. They've put some picloram on and they've added a little bit of met gel into the mix and done the same with glyphosate, and that's actually not a bad idea. It's not something I approve as a gel. I don't really want to produce a glyphosate metsulfuron mix, because when you put metsulfuron in an aqueous solution, you have a half-life, which is why the metsulfuron only had a 6-month half-life. I've got it up to 1 year half-life now, but after a year, basically the concentration of metsulfuron in an aqueous solution has dropped to 50%. So it's got a year's half-life. And if I produce it with the glyphosate, then again, there's another product with a reduced shelf life.
Thank you.
So, basic health and safety. I mean, glyphosate, despite what some conspiracy theory might lead people to believe, is the least toxicity herbicide that exists, as far as I'm concerned. And used as a gel, the possibility of ingesting large amounts of it becomes really small. I think Monsanto has a lot to blame for giving glyphosate a bad rep. When farmers use glyphosate wholesale on fields year after year, you end up reducing soil fertility, because the glyphosate kills the algae in the soil, and the algae in the soil, protozoans depend on that, and then it's a cascade effect in terms of reducing soil fertility. And then, of course, Monsanto produced glyphosate-resistant crops. So then they're spraying the entire crop with glyphosate, and glyphosate then gets into the food chain. So people are now ingesting glyphosate in the crops that they're producing. So it's just an extraordinarily bad idea. So what was the world's most effective and least toxic chemical has become banned in a lot of European countries. We had that big glyphosate survey done by the EPA last year, and New Zealand farmers were obviously really against losing any ability to use glyphosate. And I think most conservationists and environmentalists realize that glyphosate is probably the most useful of our herbicides. Okay, I'll stop there for a moment. I've sort of need to take a breath. Any questions from people so far?
Yeah, so if people put their questions in the chat, I can read them out to you, or if you can see them. But the first question is, when controlling non-viney woody weeds, such as flowering currant, gorse or broom, would you always go with the classic 120 option versus the 400 Glymax option?
Most of the time, if it's a hard woody weed, I'd go with the 240 option, which is the bamboo buster. I mean, I found that there's not many things that won't succumb to bamboo buster. I mean, like privets and cotoneasters, which are pretty tough weeds. So long as you've got the, as long as you've cut it and put it on almost immediately after cutting, it's the speed of getting on there is really important. And if you've got a privet with exposed roots, to chip the roots and put it onto the exposed tissue after you've chipped them. Make sure you're doing the outside of the stump first, and any of the bark that's exposed around the outside. So I would say the 120 I would very happy recommending for most things, and most herbaceous weeds and inkweeds and things that aren't too tough. But I would, if I had to have one of the products, I would choose the bamboo buster as my gel of choice for doing most jobs. Brilliant,
thank you. Another question was about mixture. Is there anything you know of besides hormones that would make the seeds infertile or non-viable? So that, I think they're talking about, so they don't have to pull them out of the tree, so you can cut the base and it goes up instead of down.
Yeah, there's been some research done on just scarfing the trunks of things like moth plant, and if it's done quite early on in the pod formation, it does reduce seed viability. I think there's a bit more research needs to be done on just how mature pods can be before it actually has a really significant effect on seed viability. But I'd be interested in knowing with Madeira vine whether or not using met gel scarfed onto the trunks of Madeira vine is going to actually reduce the viability of the aerial tubers which come off it.
Yeah, does anyone on here got any experience with Madeira vine? Oh, someone's saying met gel does seem to kill the rhizomes.
Well, that's really good.
So there's another question from John S. John, if you could jump on and ask your question, because sorry, I didn't quite understand it from the chat.
When people use glyphosate, is it if they use too much strength or spray on a windy day that would be the biggest problem?
Well, I mean, I don't see how weed's going to affect the gel really. It's not going to. It's going to have to be a hell of a wind to blow the gel somewhere else. So
I'm thinking of the glyphosate spray.
I mean, I would use glyphosate spray almost never.
Okay.
My experience with doing spray has always been you end up clearing a much bigger area than you mean to. I always found that taking the time to either pull things out or cut and paste them, you ended up with everything else but the weeds surviving, and then forming ground cover so that things didn't resprout. So spraying, I mean, yeah, sure. If you got a huge patch of wandering dew, then I would probably spray it with triclopyr, and then go back when you've got a little bits coming up and using a gel afterwards. But this sprays for certain circumstances, I know. I mean, like when you've got a forest full of climbing asparagus, I've used 1/3% glyphosate to knock it back out of the trees, and then come back later on with something stronger. So I mean,
how do you spell that? Sorry, how do you spell that triclopyr?
Triclopyr, TRICOPLYR. I think. Try.
Okay.
It's in the chat.
why
Look up in the chat. So just
Okay.
someone else was asking if you could
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thanks,
Yeah,
Katie.
if you could tell us about the difference between scarfing and scrape and paste.
Well, scarfing is more when you've got the roots and you sort of take the sort of surface of the root off and apply it. Whereas scraping, I think, just sort of getting a knife and scraping a bit of the bark off, so you've got something that's got some sap in it. I mean, I don't think there's a really good firm definition of the two terms, as far as I know.
Thank you. And then someone was commenting on Nigel's background of Old Man's Beard, and was wondering if you have any tips about dealing with mass problems like that. They were thinking about targeting with drones.
Wow. Okay. In terms of Old Man's Beard, the person to really ask is Chris at Project Divine. I mean, Chris at Project Divine has more experience with working with Old Man's Beard than anybody else in the country. I think they've treated hundreds of thousands of Old Man's Beard and banana passion fruits. And I would talk to Chris if you wanted a little bit more information, sort of on the ground. I mean, in general, I mean, I've got some experience with using these products, but you guys have got far more experience than I have over the years with millions of plants being treated. And I would love, and what I'm trying to do with my new website, which I'm working on at the moment, just completely revamping it and putting on a discussion board on there so that people can actually exchange information and start discussions, a bit like you get with Teslas or whatever. People get on there and start putting discussion threads on there so that gain a little bit more cross-pollination between projects.
Brilliant. I was also wondering, on your website, do you have what products are good for what weeds?
Yeah, it's on there. It's not that easy to find at the moment. There's a little thing called Dig Deeper, and in there, if you dig deeper in the website, there is that kind of information there. And I'm trying to make it with the new website much more upfront, so that people find that information far easier. I'm working on a whole series of posts now for each weed type with recommended gels and how to use them. It's a bit of a process.
Right. There's another interesting question about someone actually who needs to kill harakeke because they're doing a lot of flood resistance work. And Gly seems to work, but would Bamboo Buster be better strength, as it's seen some of the harakeke is surviving?
Well, harakeke is a rhizomatous plant, so probably metsulfuron would be most effective, but when you're using metsulfuron in the water, it's going to spread everywhere, so it's a really bad idea. So I wouldn't use anything other than a glyphosate gel on it, even though it might not be as effective as using some metsulfuron with it.
Yeah. Cool. And are you able to direct us to quality research on effectiveness of gels on various pest plants?
No.
That's a good answer. Well, I mean, one of the things in the EWC we'd like to see is a compiled list of what works where. And so there are some really good information out there. The forest and bird one that comes to mind. But yeah, that's more about information and less about research.
Yeah, I mean, all these sites are reluctant to recommend any product or any particular product for doing weed control, and I understand that. They don't want to get into arguments between different producers and so on. And it's the same with the Auckland Council. You know, they've got a really good website with lots of information on how to deal with weeds, but they steer away from recommending any particular products. So again, I think having a discussion board is probably the best way that we can go as a group of people concerned with using best methods. Is some kind of discussion board that we can share.
Yeah, and I mean, our Facebook group could also be part of that. Just there's a really good comment from Gwen Jones. If you could jump on and talk to that comment in the chat.
What's the comment? So I can't see it.
Okay, Gwen, are you still here?
Where's
Okay, she said she's almost been exclusively using Glymax on man's beard for the last 2 years with good results, as well as cut and paste. We've been trialing countersink and or scraping and pasting. This is quicker since we don't need to chop all the vines. We found countersinking and pasting especially effective in late autumn and less effective in spring.
Tabitha?
Yeah?
Tabitha, that's actually Nigel's comment to me.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
fantastic information. I mean, I would love if people sent me that information. I mean, that's gold in terms of being able to put it out on the site. So any information you have like that on what works and what doesn't work would be incredibly valuable, because I could then share it. I mean, I'm not trying.
We talked about it at the EWC meeting a couple of months ago, and I think there's a video of that, so we should be getting that out soon as well.
Yeah. Should I go to the EW site to look at that?
I'll be in touch with you about it. We are hoping to get all our videos up soon.
Brett, could someone please describe what countersinking is?
Yeah, so we've got a countersink bit on we actually use an impact driver. It's quite a small one in the bush. It's about I think I've got a 16mm countersink bit, and we just drill down maybe, just so the edges are touching the bark willows, maybe 1 centimetre down, and then fill it with paste. Yeah. And that's been really effective.
Well, you're getting into the best area of the tree, which is the sort of the outer phloem area, which is going to take it down to the roots best. That's a really good idea.
Another question is, have you come up across any clever alternative application tools aside from the brush top plastic brush? Perhaps a slide up brush, so no lid required. I'm guessing because they keep losing the lid, because that's what I do. I always lose the lid.
Yeah. I made the lids red so they were a little bit easier to find when you drop them. I just put it in my pocket when I've taken it off, and then don't put it on again until I need to. But they used to be clear, and it was a nightmare. They just lost them really quickly. A sliding brush, interesting. I looked at having the brushes produced in New Zealand. They come from Germany, and I have to import them at 40,000 at a time. To get them produced in New Zealand is an enormous cost, and I looked at a manufacturer, and they just didn't want to do it because of how complex the manufacturing technique is for something that's that fine in terms of a mold. So it didn't go any further than that.
Brilliant, thank you. So someone's is asking about bamboo buster or Glymax on ginger because they can't use met gel due to a wetlands situation.
Yeah. I mean, I've had, when I first started, I actually had quite a lot of success just wiping gel onto the underside of leaves of ginger, and it was remarkably successful. You come back a few weeks later and the ginger is dying back. So it can be used as a leaf paste on ginger quite successfully. So there's no reason why it wouldn't work put on the stumps as well.
Brilliant. And any suggestions for Bangalore palms and Chinese fan palms?
Any of the glyphosate gels would be effective.
Even the lower strength?
Probably. I mean, give it a go.
Brilliant.
That's what I'd say. Always try and use the lowest strength you can. I mean, there's no point in paying more than you need to. I'd always recommend using the glyphosate if possible. I mean, we don't want to get metsulfuron and picloram in the soil if we can possibly help it.
Yeah, could you talk a bit about that? So the difference of those chemicals and the advantages to the soil and the water of glyphosate?
Yeah, I mean, glyphosate, I mean, it's always been stated, and I think it's true, that it binds to soil particles really, really quickly. If you put soil into your tank when you're spraying, it usually reduces the effectiveness greatly. And a plant, when it dies, the glyphosate is usually decomposed within the plant's root, and it doesn't get into the soil in the first place. So it's not going to translocate from plant to plant. And I've used bamboo buster on a plant next to my roses, and it doesn't hurt them. And anything that doesn't hurt roses, you can pretty be sure it's not translocating. Metsulfuron is really bad for translocating, particularly where there's got soil water. If you've got ferns down a slope from where you've been using metsulfuron, you're going to kill the ferns because it'll really move down the slope in soil water. And picloram, I think is probably worst when the soil's wet. But what's everybody else's experience? 6 months before you can safely plant something next to it, something like that.
Great, thank you. And someone is also asking for recommendations for Caprosma grandifolia, which is not a native to the area that they are.
Huh.
I've actually
no experience with it, but I would imagine glyphosate gel would work fine.
Yeah, I've used it. It worked well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Any other questions?
I'm really impressed by some of your websites. Just the information that's being put out there is awesome. And the detail that's being put out there is the work that you're doing, sharing this information is so valuable. And if I can reference your websites on my website, I will, and if you've got before and after pictures, this one from that one from the report, from Simon Upton's report, is really lovely. That's from where was it from? I've forgotten. It's on the report area. Beautiful before and after photo. But I'm always a bit resistant to put before and after photos, because one shows lots of green things and the after one shows lots of green things. And unless you really know your weeds, it doesn't really have much impression on people who don't know their weeds.
Yeah. Keith is asking about the heat. He leaves his gels in the car. Does the heat cause them to go off? Is there any way around?
It's not a good idea. That's all I can say. The part that goes off is the gelling agent, and we have to put some preservative in the gel, particularly with the metsulfuron. Metsulfuron grows molds beautifully. Molds seem to love metsulfuron, and that's one of the problems. If it gets warm, it's particularly when you've not cleaned your brush off, you risk getting bacteria and mold into the gel, and that can cause it to go off. So it's more about keeping it clean. I mean, I always wash the brush off afterwards when I've been using it, to try and keep the brush as clean as possible to avoid getting contamination in the gel.
Brilliant, thank you. I was wondering if anyone has any advice about woolly nightshade. What's the best gel to use for that?
Doc will only use picloram now, but again, the same thing goes. If you're using picloram next to something, next to your woolly nightshade, you're running the risk of killing that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, Bamboo Buster does work on woolly nightshade, but you can get some regrowth in certain conditions in certain times of year. But what they are exactly, I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks. Someone else is just saying that they use a supermarket chiller bag in their for their gels in the car, so they're very well organised.
Oh, yeah, great, fantastic. I mean, if you can, just keep the gel in a nice, cool, dark place. It's always the best thing to do.
Brilliant.
Only the metsulfuron has a dangerous goods criteria, so it's the only one we need to send as dangerous goods by courier. So that's why it's a little more expensive to send out. The picloram gel, if it's used by a commercial operator, has to have an approved handler and 3 kilo limit in the vehicle. But if it's not used by a commercial operator, then that doesn't apply.
Yeah. Richard's just pointing out that picloram can be really devastating for restoration areas, suppressing regrowth for years. There's a high chance of killing native trees. Best avoided if possible. And I think that's especially true when working with volunteers, because some of us might be really good at this, but often when I work with volunteers, you're working with people who know very little. So I agree that you give them the lowest strength possible to do the least damage.
Yeah. I mean, if you can possibly avoid using the picloram and the metsulfuron, then do it. Always use the glyphosate gels in preference. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We seem to be coming to the end of our questions.
I was going to make a couple of comments if I've got time.
Yes, you do.
Just to talk about the Guy Salmon report, if I can get to what I talked about. Oh, no, not really. It was a good report. I thought it really covered all the bases. It wasn't anything that I didn't know already, but it was really good to have that stuff out there for public consumption. I like the Maori definition of the weed as a plant that upsets the balance that Papatuanuku needs to be well. Well, I mean, we've upset the balance so badly over the years. It's very difficult to get back to what it used to be. But having worked at Whakanefa, I managed to make moth plant a protected species. Every year now when it comes up, people go out to try and see if they can spot the little white flowers waving around. So you can succeed. I mean, there were millions of plants at Whakanefa, and Waiheke put it on the notifiable pest plant list, and it's made a huge difference. I mean, the council said I was stupid to try and encourage people to do it, but getting the public on board and having it a notifiable weed has really made the difference. Every year people go out and they look for it and kill it, so it works.
Absolutely.
Lots of publicity. It's not sexy, but moth plant is sort of one of those plants that people love to hate because they can see the pods and they see it blowing around. So that's sort of a good one to get people going on, I thought.
Someone's called it the gateway weed.
Ah, nice idea. We've on Waiheke here, climbing asparagus is one of our biggest nightmares. It's never going to go away, and unless you're onto it continuously year after year, like the Forth Road Bridge, starting back at the beginning and working in with it, it's such a difficult task to deal with, and it's one that, I mean, it's not really suitable for weed gels. It's much more suitable for spraying, but then going back again with some gels if you can to just put a little bit on a glove and wipe it up. That's quite a good way of using the gel if you're dealing with small weeds. Works well on things like.
Can you explain that? Sorry, can you explain? What do you mean by putting it on a glove?
I mean, when I'm doing something like little patches of climbing asparagus that are isolated, I take a glove, I put the brush on and wipe it up the plant with the glove. So you don't have to wipe it all. You don't have to put much on. You need almost nothing, but the glove's quite a good way of just sort of wiping up the plant after you've put it on with the gel, with the brush.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that can work with things like Montbretia and stuff if you're treating that with Met gel.
Fabulous. So Richard's put in the chat, if you're watching, all the moth plant sites throughout Auckland. So it's an ongoing battle.
Yeah. That's a good Facebook site they've got.
Yeah. So the stamp.
Stamp.
Site. And also the CAMS site has got a lot of really good stuff up there.
It's fantastic to see people actually doing the weed control. I mean, it's really only started over the last 15, 20 years in earnest, and now it's just such a thing, and it makes such a difference to a piece of bush when you've got the weeds out. It looks good, it just starts to look healthy again.
It's very
something
satisfying.
about the look.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, if we got any other questions? Oh, here's someone about Cape Ivy and the 4 dunes in a large area. Would a gel be effective?
I don't see why not. Cape Ivy. Met gel comes to mind, but I haven't had that much experience with it. I mean, glyphosate will probably work. It's a very soft, fleshy thing, so I'd probably just use the original. Would probably be strong enough.
Brilliant, thank you. And someone else was asking, why is Picarum being recommended by DOC and councils? Do they have research that suggests glyphosate doesn't work?
I think they have research that shows that glyphosate doesn't always work.
Right.
And they don't want their contractors to go out doing something that doesn't always work because it costs them money. I think that's probably the answer. I mean, it's sad. Poor DOC. I feel so sorry for them. I would hate to be working for DOC these days. I'm sorry if any of you guys are DOC. It's just so depressing seeing the budget pulled out from under your feet all the time, and people on the ground who actually know the job and care about an area far better than contractors and admin people. Sorry, they are.
Yeah. Now, someone was asking more about that glove method you're talking about. So how particular are you about what gloves you wear? Do you have under gloves?
I always wear nitrile gloves.
Brilliant, thank you. And
have a few of them because they wear out quite quick.
And is there what weeds are good at being knocked back by applying gel under the leaf? What are the good ones to do that to?
Oh, I mean, things like inkweed and boneseed and anything that's reasonably fleshy. All the herbaceous weeds, it works really well. I mean, if it's a huge tree, then you're going to have too many leaves. But it's really useful on things like honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle, and you can only see bits of it sticking out. You can just put some paste on the bit that's sticking out, and it's amazing how much dies back.
Brilliant.
Rather than crawling through the bush trying to find the vines. If you want to take a lazy approach, that works quite well. If you come back again and check on it afterwards.
I was going to ask about that. So using met in a wetland on the underside of the leaf would that translocate into the water?
Yeah, probably would.
It would. Okay, so just no met.
I wouldn't.
Someone else talking about success with Glymax on the underside of bear's breeches and blue.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They're still waiting to see long-term effects.
Yeah, I mean the best chemical would be metsulfuron, but then it's the riskiest as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone else was asking about how far gels will translocate down. So if you start high.
Yeah, willows are really strange. You can put it on half of the willow stem and it'll kill half the willow and the other half will still be alive. So I think it probably depends on the plant. I mean, things like privet, I think it's really important to get as low as possible.
Okay, brilliant. Yes, there's also someone else saying, Keith saying, would please put in the chat preferred topics for the next meeting. I know that wetlands has come up a couple of times of talking about weeding and wetlands. So yeah, so please put in the chat what you'd like to hear about next. And I can see someone's got their hand up. Gwen, would you like to ask a question or say something?
I'm happy to keep going for a little bit longer. We'd had a long-standing appointment at 6:30, so
Okay,
anyway.
Perfect. Well,
No, that was from that earlier point when I was saying it was no.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so some of the people want to talk about working around water, flood resilience, planting strategies with Tradescantia. So I think, yeah, there seems to be a lot of interest around wetlands and water, working with that. So also, if people have someone that they know would be a particularly good speaker, if you could put that in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Blackberry, get right down to the corm if you can before you treat it and put bamboo buster on.
So which on Blackberry? Sorry, say that repeat it
I
again.
saw a Blackberry comment just come up and I said, if you can get right down to the base and cut into the corm and put a bamboo buster on, that works well.
Brilliant. Coral tree is another question.
Oh, coral tree. I've heard about coral tree. I can't remember what worked. Sorry. Anybody got an idea?
Is that the same as flame tree?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep, it's the same.
Yeah.
Anybody got an idea?
All I know
My
is
best idea is to ask contractors to remove the stems, the limbs, when they do a site. I went to site this morning. The contractors came and cut down a flame tree, and they left all the bits lying in the reserve. And now there's 20 flame trees growing.
Yeah.
I've seen it mulched and in a farm, and small bits of mulch regrowing for years and years and years. So yeah, I think every bit that you can get out. But I was wondering if you pasted both ends.
Paste both ends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing willows and you're cutting branches off, don't just leave it lying on the ground without pasting the end that you've cut off.
And that works, does it?
Don't quote me. It's certainly better than not putting it on the ground, but hang it in the tree if you can, I suppose.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Mm.
Well, thank you, everyone. It was a really good turnout. I think we got up to 45 at one point. Here's someone that wants to talk about safety and working around water. Brilliant. So this is all recorded, so we'll reach out to people.
I mean, glyphosate's the safest thing to work around water. You're talking about huge dilution factors. I mean, if some gets into water, it's a huge dilution factor. That's all I can say.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you so much for talking to us tonight. We've really appreciated it. I've watched your company grow for quite a number of years, and it's really so good to see someone from within the industry developing and doing that. So you understand about volunteers and the needs. So it's really good.
Thank you. Yep. It's been fun.